So I'm the photographer with a gallery in the jungle. That was a bit of a surprise for me. They hadn't told me, so I'm very pleased with that. My exhibition is called Eye Contact and features 25 portraits of primates, 11 different species from around Africa and Asia that I have photographed over a period of 7 years, all in the wild. What really interests me and what I explore in my portraits is what I call micro expressions. All these intricate expressions in the faces and the eyes of primates that show them as individuals with feelings and moods and personalities. I like to capture as many sides of their emotional repertoire as possible, so I typically take between 3,000 and 4,000 portraits of each species that I work with, and each of these portraits is a glimpse into the nature of primates. And let me show you a couple of examples from my gallery. First here, the black crested macaque, a male flirting with a female. An alpha male Gelada sending a pink thread. A mother orangutan looking at her baby with a face full of affection. A mother Japanese macaque embracing her young to keep it warm in the winter cold, and with the fierce look of a protective mother in her eyes, telling you not to mess with her young. A thoughtful looking black crested macaque. And a young Proboscis monkey bachelor posing with closed eyes and the most peaceful expression on his face, looking almost like he's meditating. In this talk, I would like to invite you on a journey into the fascinating and surprisingly complex world of these intelligent animals, focusing on their faces and their personalities. First, though, let me just quickly tell the story of my way into wildlife photography. As Lars said, I have a background as a wildlife biologist and mammalogist, and have spent a number of years doing research on larger mammals in the Amazon rainforest and the Pantanal wetlands of Brazil. And these here are some of the animals that I work with. Among others, I was the first one to use camera trapping for mammal research in South America, and I was lucky to discover a new species of deer in the Peruvian Amazon. I really enjoyed this life as a field biologist, but I also felt an increasing urge to put myself in a situation where I could tell stories about wildlife to a much larger audience. So after 5 years in the wilderness of South America, I shifted from science and into working full-time with wildlife communication and public engagement. Among others, I started writing books about wildlife, and at the same time, I also became a dedicated wildlife photographer, and since then, I photographed animals on all 7 continents. For a decade, I was particularly drawn to Africa. And along the way, I became more and more interested in taking portraits of the animals. I really like the aesthetic simplicity of portraits. I love all of the details and the textures you see when you zoom into the face of an animal with a big prime lens. And most of all, I love being able to look animals in the eye. You know, there's this old poetic saying that the eyes are the mirror of the soul. And all this culminated in 2014 when I began my current photo project with the aim of taking portraits of animals all over the world, focusing on their facial expressions and the look in the eyes. And I called this photo project Eye Contact. Up to this point, I actually wasn't particularly interested in primates, but that was about to change. Not long after, I traveled to Ethiopia, and among others, I spent a week in the Simien Mountains photographing a very special primate, the Gelada, one of the world's largest and most dramatic-looking monkeys. The Geladas live in some of the largest primate communities and most socially advanced primate communities known at all. They've been seen in herds of up to 1,200 individuals. And I got to sit many hours each day right in the middle of their society. Sometimes they would even approach me to within a few meters, and that gave me great opportunities to take their portraits. And here are some of the results. The Geladas, they have such intense personalities and such intense look in those burning orange eyes of theirs. This here is an alpha male displaying the unique chest mark that has given the Gelada the alternative name bleeding heart monkey. In the alpha males, that means males that have a harem, the chest mark is bright red. In the bachelors, like this one here, it's pink. If an alpha male is kicked off his throne and loses his harem, his chest mark will turn from red to pink, sometimes as quickly as overnight. And the new alpha male, his chest mark will go from pink to red. This is an example of a fascinating phenomena that amongst all the mammals are only known from some of the primates, and that is that they have these areas of naked skin where they can apply really bright colors. And they use this skin as billboards to advertise information about their status and about their strength. And I'll show you more examples of that later on. Typical family portrait. A male, an alpha male with his harem. Now the males may have all the dramatic looks, but in reality, in many ways, it is actually the females that are in charge in Gelada society. And you may begin to get an understanding of why that is when you look into the face of this female here with a raised eyebrow and eyes with a very firm and maybe even disapproving stare. So being a primate male is not always easy, as this expression might reflect. The Gelada has also evolved a unique facial expression that this male is gearing up for. It starts out looking like a yawn, but then he pulls back his upper lip, creating the illusion that he's shooting out his jaw, and it looks quite terrifying when you see it live. This here is what I call a yawn display. Notice how his eyes are closed. So this here is not a threat directed at anyone in particular. It's rather a general announcement to whoever might be watching that this male has dangerous weapons and should not be challenged. This here, however, this is a threat. Look how his pink eyebrows are pulled all the way up into his forehead. His eyes are wide open. He has an intense stare. He makes sure you see his blood red chest mark showing that he's an alpha male. And then he flips his upper lip like this, flashing his long canines in one of the most theatrical displays in the mammal kingdom. After a week in the company of the Geladas, I was completely sold. They blew me away with their intelligence, with their complex social behavior, and particularly with this amazing range of facial expressions that they have. And it was because of the Geladas that I decided to focus my eye contact project on primates. And since then, I've traveled to another 10 destinations around Africa and Asia, from tropical rainforests to snow-covered mountains, with the goal of capturing the unique personalities of a selection of the world's most charismatic monkeys and great apes. One of those was the black crested macaque, endemic to the monsoon forest of a small corner of the Indonesian island of Sulawesi. I spent 2 weeks photographing the yaki, as it's also called in the native language, and it quickly became one of my favorite primates. When I photograph primates, I always follow their rhythm. And the yakis would typically start out their day spending a couple of hours slowly moving through the jungle, looking for breakfast. And then when they walked, I walked with them. And when they sat down to relax and socialize and groom, I would sit down next to them and start taking their portraits. And just to give you an idea about the mood of such a quote-unquote photo shoot, let me just show you another short video that I shot with my iPhone. So I sat down about 5 meters away from the 2 macaques that you see over at the root. They're sitting there grooming. And as I was sitting there photographing, one yaki after the other entered the stage and plunked themselves on the ground until I was completely surrounded by them. And that looked like this. So this here is what I love the most when I photograph primates, when they let me into their world and allow me to be close to them, when they're completely at ease and just being themselves, because this is when they show many of their most engaging facial expressions, whether they are interacting with each other, observing each other, showing off, or meditating. A study has shown that out of all the more than 20 species of macaques, the yaki here is actually the one with the highest number of facial expressions, and they really are great models. Here, a teenager. And this here is the alpha male of the troop that I spend most time with. He always had this tough look on his face, making me think of a warrior king. And this here is actually one of my favorite portraits. He has so much power in his eyes. Unlike any other animal that I have ever photographed, the yakis will actually look you right in the eyes. And sometimes I even got the feeling that they were studying me and maybe even judging me, like in this case here. And another thing that struck me time and time again with the yakis is how incredibly clever they seem. And you see it in their eyes that are just so full of awareness and presence. And not only are they highly intelligent, they're also very clever with their hands. And this here is what happened one day when I got up to stretch my legs and walked a few steps away from my camera. I don't know if it's trying to imitate me or if it's just looking at its reflection in the back of my camera. These guys love looking themselves in the mirror, but it sure does look like a little wildlife photographer, doesn't it? Out of the many different facial expressions of the yakis, this here is the most engaging. It's an expression called bared teeth display because it bares its teeth, and it's used by many monkeys, and mostly it's used in situations of conflict and potential violence to show fear and to show submission. But the yaki is characterized by being exceptionally friendly and tolerant and even forgiving. And because of this personality type, it has taken the meaning of this expression and flipped it completely on its head and used it as a smile. They smile with the same purpose as we do, which is to show that you have friendly intentions and that you would like to engage socially, and they would even smile at me. And here he is again, the guy with his hair and his teeth. So what's happening here is that a female is backing up to him to flirt with him, and his response to her is to send her this rather cheesy smile to let her know that he might be interested. So let's just take a closer look at these facial expressions. What's going on here? It has to do with something called facial expression muscles. These are highly specialized muscles that have evolved with a specific purpose of creating facial expressions. You only find them in the mammals, not in any other animals. And out of all the mammals, it is by far the primates that have the most sophisticated facial expression muscles and the largest variety of facial expressions. The monkeys and the great apes that I have photographed, they all have in common that they have this large, naked face, just like ourselves. And the purpose for having a large, naked face is that it gives you a large canvas with which to produce facial expressions. And these monkeys and great apes that I have photographed, they all have the same number, almost the same number of facial expression muscles as we humans do. And interestingly, they use the same main areas of the face to make their facial expressions as we do, which is around the eyes and around the lips. And that's why these primates have so many facial expressions that are similar to what we're used to seeing in ourselves. The facial expressions in primates, they change all the time. Just watch this Japanese macaque. The macaques, they use their eyebrows a lot for their facial expressions. And the facial expressions, they change so rapidly that we're not able to perceive all of the nuances with the naked eye. But because I photograph with a speed of 12 frames per second, I'm able to freeze all of these nuances. And let me show you an example here with a little cute orangutan youngster. I'm going to show you a series of 4 portraits taken within only 2 seconds. And just watch how much the face changes. So orangutans, they have these big soft lips and they use their lips a lot for their facial expressions. In order to photograph the orangutan, I traveled to the rainforest of Borneo to a large national park in Kalimantan, where the only mode of transportation is by boat along small rivers. And while I was in the area, I was actually living on board a riverboat. The name orangutan means person of the forest, and that's quite appropriate because we share around 97% of our DNA with this great ape. And here is a dominant male with that characteristic mask and a well-groomed beard. And an even bigger male, an old, proud, one-eyed king. And a female. Typical of great apes, the orangutans have an amazing diversity of facial expressions, and the females often have this gentle look on their face, which is quite telling because orangutan females are some of the most affectionate and patient mothers you can imagine. And the youngsters are absolutely irresistible. Here, one with a wild hair day. And have you noticed how orangutan youngsters, they have these light rings around the eyes and light lips? Why do you presume that is? Well, my theory is that it has to do with exactly what I was just talking about before, that this is where, these are the parts of the face that it uses to make its facial expressions around the eyes and the lips. And by having light skin in these areas, it guides your eyes to pay more attention to it and thus pay more attention to the emotions that it's expressing. So one early morning, when I was still on board the riverboat, I heard these movements in the branches on the other side of the river, and that led me to discover this guy coming our way and looking straight at us. He climbed down to the river and started drinking, using his hands for scooping up water, which he wasn't particularly efficient at, so he ended up spilling most of the water on his head and his fur. But he looked like he was really enjoying his morning drink and had such brilliant expressions on his face, a real charming character. And speaking of characters, the second primate that I went to Borneo to photograph was the Proboscis monkey, and that is every bit as cartoonish as you might imagine, given the way it looks. But as it turns out, there's a lot more to it. Proboscis monkeys have really interesting behaviors, leading quite complex social lives. And out of all the monkeys that I have photographed, they're the ones with the most expressive faces. There are only two primates in the world with a fleshy nose, humans and the proboscis monkey. And that, combined with its large, naked and wrinkled face, makes it look more human than any other monkey. In the adult males, the nose grows up to 17 centimeters long, and when relaxed, it covers the mouth so that the male needs to lift up his nose in order to be able to eat. And of course, such a wonderful nose has several purposes. First and foremost, it's a symbol of masculinity. And the alpha males, the one with harems, are typically the ones with the largest noses. The nose is quite wobbly, as you can see here, and it also works as a kind of loudspeaker, a resonance chamber that amplifies the deep honking calls of the males. And finally, and not surprisingly, the nose also plays an important part in the facial expressions. So when a proboscis monkey male is unhappy with the behavior of another proboscis monkey, he will shoot forward his head, open his eyes wide, and then he will point his nose at the offender to set it in his place, often accompanied with a deep honking. And here a female. The females may not have quite as impressive a nose as the males, but they still have really strong profiles, and they're very strong personalities. They are known to be exceptionally temperamental, and one of the main tasks of the alpha male is to separate and create peace between his wives when they're having heated arguments. The males are very different characters from the females. They're the most laid-back personalities you can imagine. I think of them as the hippies of the monkey world. In many other monkey species, the males will frequently fight for power and rank and dominance, but not the proboscis monkey males. They may point their nose at each other and honk at each other, but physical fights and serious threats are very rare, so there's something to be learned here from these peace-loving animals. One day when I was photographing proboscis monkeys in the mangrove of Borneo, this young bachelor showed up and sat in front of me and started posing. He sat there for 5 minutes, during which I took more than 200 portraits of him, and he gave me such a range of looks, postures, and expressions. And he had the kindest and most mellow face I've ever seen, I think. Several times he would tilt his head back and look up at the sky. I don't know why. And then he would close his eyes and disappear into his inner world. And one of those times I got this photo here where he's posing in profile. So this here has become one of my favorite situations to capture when I take primate portraits, when they have closed eyes. And let me just show you another example. This here is a red-shanked duck from Vietnam that we call costume monkey in Danish. It's one of the most colorful and exquisitely dressed primates in the world, and in my book, the most beautiful of all monkeys. Here a male sitting in a lotus-like pose with closed eyes in a perfect moment of Zen. And I actually call this series of portraits here the Zen monkey. There is something so serene about this expression. And one of the things that I really love about these closed eye portraits is that they show a much more peaceful and soulful side to primates than what most people are used to seeing. There's a special category of primates that really attract me, and that is around five species of monkeys that are adapted to surviving in extremely cold regions. The most famous one is the Japanese macaque here, the only monkey in the world with a culture of frequenting a hot spa. But the hotspot for these winter monkeys, as I call them, is China. And here we are in the Kinling Mountains in the western province of Shanxi, a landscape covered with snow for up to half of the year. Winter temperature is down to minus 30 degrees Celsius. That's the coldest temperature ever measured in a wild primate habitat. And here lives a creature that looks like something straight out of a Chinese fairy tale. The golden snub-nosed monkey with its blue face and strange nose, here seen in its thick and lush winter coat. It's one of the most colorful primates in the world, and when it sticks out its pink tongue, it creates a perfect trinity of bright colors. I've been told by several mothers that some toddlers actually have the same habit. And this here is an alpha male. They're some of the largest monkeys. They weigh up to almost 20 kilograms. They have this intensely bright and dark orange fur. And then, to top it all off, they have this bizarre ornamentation in the shape of some fleshy outgrowth in the corner of their mouth. These are believed to be equivalent to the mask in the orangutan males, the big nose in the Proboscis monkey males, a symbol of masculinity and power, and presumably considered attractive in their world. Here one enjoying a ray of sun on a cold winter's day. And an alpha male with a silent threat display. A mother keeping her young warm. And a baby sticking out its tongue. Let's move then to the province of Yunnan and into the Himalayas, a place called Baima Snow Mountains. Here lives another species of snub-nosed monkey that was actually believed to be extinct for many years, but was then rediscovered in 1960. The black and white snub-nosed monkey. This monkey lives higher up in the mountains than any other wild primate. It's been encountered in up to 4,700 meters. And during the winter, you can observe it walking through the snow on its hind legs, leaving human-like footprints in the snow. So this here is probably the closest you get to a real-life Yeti. All snub-nosed monkeys have these prominent and full lips, but the black and white snub-nosed monkey has taken this feature a step further and has evolved the monkey version of lipstick. Both sexes have beautiful pink lips. To the right you see a female, but the lips are largest and flashiest in the males, in particular in the alpha males, like the one you see to the right here. The alpha males have the brightest pink lips, and during the mating season, they actually turn up the pinkness of their lips, whereas the younger males, they turn down the pinkness of their lips so as not to provoke the alpha males. And there's a good reason for that you see here, a threat display. And the baby, they're born snow white. And a tender moment between a father and his son. When I began my primate project, there was immediately one species that went to the top of my wish list, the world's most mythical and iconic monkey. It lives in remote rainforest of Central Africa, and it's infamous amongst primatologists for being difficult to find and follow and study. So figuring out how I could get close enough to it in the wild to take its portraits was a real challenge. It took me several years. I opted for going to Gabon. And Gabon is one of the wildest places I've ever traveled, so that made this trip extra exciting. And here it is, finally, the mandrill that has the distinction of both being the world's largest monkey, the males weigh up to 35 kilograms, and the world's most colorful primate. This here is the alpha male of the troop that I got to hang out with, and he is one of the most awe-inspiring animals I've ever been close to, oozing power and royalty. On this particular occasion, he sat down about 5 meters away from me, and I almost felt like I was granted an audience with him. He gave me the best photo session I have ever had. He posed for me for half an hour, like a model sitting for a portrait, and he allowed me to take more than 600 of his photos. And watch now some of the amazing expressions of this king of the jungle. A yawn display. And an expression that looks almost cheerful. And here he's posing in portrait, in profile, as he's looking up at his underlings in the trees and sending them a yawn display. So, as you may have gathered by now, the color red plays a special role for the males of several primates, and that's also the case with the mandrills. And a bright red nose signifies that you are strong, healthy, high-ranking, aggressive, and willing to fight. And needless to say, that the dominant males are the ones with the reddest noses, and this here is a male in his prime. So not only is the mandrill the world's most colorful primate, but also the most colorful of all mammals in the world, and the ultimate example of this thing I've been talking about several times, how primates are able to use bright colors almost like an extra language. So here they are, all sitting in a pose somewhat similar to Rodin's famous sculpture, The Thinker, and I really like the symbolism of that, because at the very core of who they are as beings is their exceptional intelligence. This intelligence, combined with living in large, socially complex societies, is what has led the primates to evolve the most complex and most advanced facial expressions of all the animals. Recently, I came upon this lovely quote from Jane Goodall. She said, "You cannot share your life with a dog or a cat and not know perfectly well that animals have personalities and minds and feelings." And that is exactly what primates show through their facial expressions. We humans are all about facial expressions. And as a matter of fact, out of all the primates, we are the species with the most complex facial expressions. And as you know, we constantly read and analyze each other's faces. And when we see portraits of primates with expressions similar to our own, we immediately do the same thing. We read their face and we see their feelings, their minds, and their personalities. And because of that, I think the facial expressions are a unique window into the soul of the primates, allowing us to see how close we are to each other. There is, unfortunately, a rather sad side to photographing primates, a situation that many wildlife photographers know all too well, and that is that I'm documenting a vanishing world. More than 60% of all the primate species in the world are in danger because of human-induced factors such as habitat destruction and hunting for food and for the pet trade. And that also goes for most of the species that I've been showing you here today. And it is my sincere hope that my portraits of primates can make more people realize what amazing animals they are, not just to look at, but also with all the levels that they contain. And through that, make more people realize that it would be an incredible loss if these animals were to disappear forever. Thank you very much for your attention.